Every time.
Yes.
It's the damn controller. The buttons got stuck because it's dirty.
Don't blame the controller. I'm just kidding.
No, it's dirty. And I'll show you how to clean it. Right now. Alright, so here's our dirty controller. We're going to need a small Phillips head screwdriver, some Windex, and some paper towels to clean her out. So the first step is to flip it over. There's 5 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take those 5 out. So once you get all 5 screws out, you can then hold the controller like this and pull it apart. Notice how I'm pulling from there. It's the easiest way to do it. Then the trick here is to try to get the back of the controller off without pulling these buttons off, because that'll make your life a lot easier later on. So you kind of jiggle it up and forward, and then take it off like that, and you can set that aside. If there's any dirt in here, you can get some canned air or some Windex and just clean it out too. It's a good idea since you have it open already. The next step is to remove the battery. Now, don't just pull on these cables here because that could damage this connector. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is get a small flathead screwdriver and kind of jiggle it gently out. And if it doesn't come out at first, you can use these little holes here, these slots, and kind of push the connector out from the inside. Next, you want to take this small Phillips head screw and take it out too. Next, different PlayStation 3 controllers have different insides depending on which model you have. This particular one, which is the most popular and recent model, has a large plastic tray almost that connects everything. Some of them don't have trays that connect the motors to the rest of the controller. So this one does, and I'll show you how to remove it. There's small tabs on the left and right side of each motor. 3, 4. So what you'll want to do is release the tabs one at a time using a screwdriver or your fingernail, and that allows you to lift up. Do the same thing on the other side. And that frees the motors. Okay, once those are slightly freed, you want to lift up on the buttons slightly, the trigger buttons here on the back. Just a little bit so that way button 1 L and R become loose. Once they're loose, you take them out. Then the entire assembly can be released. And you could set that aside for now. Since what we'll be concentrating on are these pads and the buttons underneath. Now's a good time to mention that you might want to keep track of which goes where. This cross-shaped pad goes for the directional buttons, and the flower-like one goes for the circle, square, and whatever the hell you want to call them buttons. There's also another pad here, which covers the start, select, and the PS button. So you'll want to take them all out, and then you could just kind of flip the controller over and shake everything out. So you have the PS3 button, the 4 action buttons, I'm going to call them, because I don't really know what they're supposed to be called, and this little cross button. Now you want to get some Windex and wet a paper towel. Boop, boop, boop. This will clean off any gunk that may cause your buttons to stick when you push them in, which is a common problem. Then you could clean off these pads as well. If you don't have any Windex, you could also use a little bit of rubbing alcohol. You could make a mixture of 1-to-1 water and alcohol. So now, we move to the top of the controller, do the same thing, just make sure that all the spaces are clean. If you have to, get a Q-tip and just rub around inside just to make sure that there's no gunk or I don't even want to know what you have stuck in your controller. Alright, now that it's clean, it's time to put it all back together. And to do that, first start with the top of the controller face down. And keep in mind where all the buttons go. So we start with the triangle, and note that there's small tabs. The tabs line up here. That way they only go in one way, and they can't rotate, so that way they're always facing up. Then we put the membranes back on. Put the membrane back on there. Make sure that it's all the way down. You don't want that sticking up at all. It should be flat. This goes on next. All right, now that's clean. Let's set it aside for a minute. You can now turn your attention to this part of the controller, the circuit board and the membrane contacts. If you have to, you can get a Q-tip with Windex and just, you know, rub off anything that's there. Don't rub too hard and don't use anything too caustic. Nothing more than a little bit of Windex or maybe some alcohol and water, because you don't want to corrode anything. All right, so now that that's clean, we could start putting it back together. And to do that, we just follow the same instructions as we did, but in reverse. This is the tricky part because these two pieces tend to wobble around quite a bit. So we kind of want everything in there loosely. All right. You could just jiggle it until it gets in there. Okay. You want to put the L1 and R1 triggers back in, and they slide in from the top, like so. Then once those are in, you have to take this assembly and kind of slide it down into place. Same on both sides. Make sure that the buttons feel all right. Now, a lot of people might have some problems with the L2 and R2 trigger buttons coming out. Now, let me show you how to get those back in properly. I'm going to take them out on purpose. You should try to fix your controller without taking them out, but if they do come out, it's an easy fix. There's a small spring here. Let me see. There we go. See the small spring? To put them back in, you want to move the spring up like that, so that way it catches. See how it's catching there? And then push these two tabs into these two holes. There's one on either side. So make sure that the spring is up there, and then push down into the two tabs. There you go. So then once that's in place, you want to get the motherboard of the controller back into its slot. And remember that the joysticks are connected to that, so you gotta make sure that they're in place properly. There's also some small pins that need to line up. One's right here. Make sure that they're lined up and that everything's flat. Then you can replace the screw that we took out earlier that holds it all in place. Push the motors back into place so you hear the click. And before we close up the back, you want to just give all the buttons on the front a quick check to make sure that they all feel all right, and they do. We could reconnect the battery, get the back on. If you start like this and slowly maneuver it over the buttons and then down, you can get it back on without any problems. All right, replace the 5 screws. And there you have it. A nice clean PS3 controller. You know you're not really playing a game.
Oh yeah, I do. I'm winning.
Yeah, me too. It's not even on.